It would have been a good point, albeit with some time traveler-y examples. I'm almost sad that it didn't make it all the way through production.
Only shooting stars break the mood. Hello, friend. So, Super Mario Bros. Love it, hate it, or just indifferent by it, you cannot deny the fact the franchise is packed full of useful power-ups that make playing any game in this series a blast, sometimes more literally than others. And as you'd expect with anything in the online sphere, it's fairly easy to stumble upon a countdown list going over the list of a user's favorite power-ups. Hence the creation of the video, Top 15 Mario Power-Ups made by the users Water Master Fawn and ChaosKey4013. Unfortunately, the original version of these videos are no longer up, as Fawn had quit making commentaries and ChaosKey had deleted the two parts for the video, as explained in DaisyPhoxtrot's video. However, even if these two degrees aren't necessarily important to this video in particular, I'll still be linking both videos in the description so people aren't left in the dark. Of course, with opinions on video games comes disagreements with them, thus leading into Degree 1, a co-op comm made by MasterTP10 and DigitalTy on said countdown list on November 18th, 2015. Recently, by almost 2 years ago, a new commentator by the name of Mr. made a commentary on that commentary on July 20th, 2022, and 3 days ago as of scripting this, DaisyPhoxtrot had made a commentary on that. Whew! I think this will be my first ever comm towards another member in this community. That would be something. Now, I don't actually have any real problems with the latest video mentioned itself. I actually agreed with a lot of points Daisy made towards not only Mr. but towards TP and Ty as well. Though, there is a reason for me being here, and that comes in the form of an unused point from Mr. in their script Daisy ends up showing within her video. But before I do get into the meat of things, I should preface that this point of Mr's didn't end up going into the video, as most likely, they didn't quite stand behind it during the scripting or editing process. So because of this, I won't make it seem like they still stand behind the point. I'll still be covering it, however, as I do think this small bit of critique could come in handy for scripting future projects, both towards Mr. as well as to anyone else wanting to make commentaries. With all that being said, let this side quest commence!
I think this is the worst arc of the original manga.
Ireland's not even a real country.
The only real downside to the fire power-up is the fact that it hasn't really evolved from the first game.
Keep this in mind for later.
Used it in such a unique way were the Galaxy games, where it was a timed power-up, so you had to use it fast to complete a puzzle before it ran out. And Super Mario Bros. Wii and U, in which you can jump spin to shoot fireballs in both directions.
Psst, guys, aren't you going to point out to Fawn that the spin jump feature has been a thing in Super Mario World to totally own her lack of research? No? Okay, I guess.
But then again, does it really need to change that much? I mean, it's such a good power-up.
One collab partner says Fire Flower needs to evolve, the other collab partner says it's fine the way it is. This is why I have trust issues.
Okay, before I move on to the part that I wanted to cover, I did say I was only going to cover one specific section of the video, but after listening to this point a bit, I do have a small thing to say towards TP here. From the wording Fawn used in her segment, it doesn't really seem to me she was saying the Fire Flower needed to evolve, just that the only downside to it was that it hasn't really had an evolved state since the first game. And judging from the examples she herself had stated within this part, as well as the added example Daisy had given, it's clear that there have been a few times where this item had a few changes throughout the series. They may not be as big of changes to fully count as true evolutions to the formula, but they are changes nonetheless. So the added point from ChaosKey questioning if the flower really needs changing could have been leading from Fawn's point, where since there have been a few subtle changes to the formula, there doesn't really seem to be that much of a need for it. Of course, this does ultimately still come down to the two users disagreeing on an entry, so it's not really that much of an issue and doesn't really take away from what Daisy will bring up here in a sec. Just thought I should give some of my own 2 cents to this particular bit. Anyway, let's continue.
Gee, it's almost like collab partners can disagree on certain things and need a compromise. Wow! Like, come on. It's obvious from the outset that people are different and so are their opinions. So why is it such a surprise that they can disagree on whether or not the Fire Flower needs to evolve? Besides, do you really think every collab countdown in the history of ever has had the collaborators share every single opinion expressed? Strangely enough, this is something Mr. covered in his script. Somehow it didn't make it to the full video, and I don't know why. It would have been a good point, albeit with some time traveler-y examples. I'm almost sad that it didn't make it all the way through production.
Alright, on its own, this is a fair point to make towards TP, as yes, collab partners can and will disagree on certain topics, especially in an opinion-based video like these countdown lists. Some placements will need to have certain pushback to forge a list, and it's up to the partners in question to reach a compromise, either in dropping one option for another, adding the two options in the same slot, or ultimately dropping them both entirely to come up with a different option that both will agree on. However, this point of Daisy's isn't really my main focus here. Instead, it has to do with the part of Mr. script that Daisy provides here. Pablo, if you could read this out for the people in the audience? Sure thing! Ah yes, because as we all know, it's totally impossible for two people to disagree on something when making the countdown. Every top whatever list ever has to feature the creators agreeing with each other on every single point ever, because that makes good content. I know it's an example from the future, but I like to bring up Team 4-Star and their DBCember list on the best techniques in Dragon Ball as an example. The entry on the Final Flash is mostly Karen and Lanny going back and forth on whether or not it should have made the list at all. And as we all know, that is a bad thing because they disagreed on something and made it evident in their final product. Thank you, Pablo. Anytime! Also, sorry for having such a close ablaze last time we did these commentary projects. Not really the best time, Pablo, but I appreciate your apology. Now go along and play with Ivan and Winston. Hokey dokey! Anyways, same initial premise as Daisy's own point towards TP at the beginning, as it's basically written in the same sarcastic tone Daisy used to show how bizarre it is for someone to think collab partners should agree with each other 100% of the time. But then we get into the middle and end of this argument, as Mr. showcases an example of two collab partners in the middle of an argument in a countdown, that being where Lanny Pator and Kieran were disagreeing about the technique Final Flash being placed in the number 6 spot in the top 12 Dragon Ball techniques list, and ending off with them saying it's a bad thing for them to disagree with each other because their argument was shown on screen. Now, this could very well be another sarcastic argument towards TP as with the intro, but there's no real indication of it using sarcasm aside from the line, as we all know. There could also be a chance where this part of the argument is 100% played up to be straight, giving off a more condescending tone as if the point they're making should be obvious. And yes, they have used that tone of voice before in their commentary.
Funny story. Part 1 was released with Part 2 not being finished. So for half a month, nothing but empty promises.
Well, here we are in the future with Fawn having deleted her channel and Sean deleting the power-ups vid. I can't believe you didn't consider this would happen and dare to continue linking the video in the description afterwards. You're such a terrible person.
Words do still have meaning, mister, and it's through the tone of voice you're using that ultimately determines which meaning you're giving to these words. So in the small chance that this was originally supposed to be a serious point towards TP, I don't agree with this latter half. Firstly, to get this out of the way, this is in fact a time traveler argument, as TP and Ty's Comm on Fawn and ChaosKey was made back in 2015, and this countdown of TFSs wouldn't have been out till December 27th of 2019. That's 4 years apart. If you want to use a much more reliable example that was made within the time frame of TP's video, maybe not necessarily Fawn's and ChaosKey's videos, as I'm not too sure when those were made, you could have used the DBCember list made in 2014 called Top Iconic Moments in Dragon Ball, where in the number 10 segment of Part 3, Lanny and Kaiser, albeit briefly, argued whether or not Vegeta killing Android 19 counted towards whenever Goku couldn't defeat an opponent.
Between some classic quotes and utter domination of Android 19, this scene is the perfect way to reintroduce the Prince of All Saiyans.
Also, this is the first fight we see where Vegeta actually defeats an opponent that Goku couldn't handle himself.
What? How does that count? He was having a heart attack.
Shut up! Taking this!
The Prince is back, baby. With a bang.
I'll get into the problems with the time traveler argument as a whole in the final thought segment. Secondly, let's actually look at the argument in question, the number 6 segment of the top 12 Dragon Ball techniques list that goes over Vegeta's Final Flash.
6.
Both basic.
Oh, come on! It's the final fucking Flash! How is it not going to be this high on the list? Frankly, I think it should be higher.
Well, I'm actually torn. On one hand, it's Vegeta's most famous technique, and apparently his most powerful. In a majority of the games, it's his highest level attack. The pose is, frankly, unforgettable. On the other hand, it's actually only ever used once in the manga proper, a couple other times in Z Filler and Super.
And it's just a beam! A big yellow beam that hits Cell and does jack squat. Just a beam? If this thing had hit Cell head on, you couldn't have filled an ashtray with his remains. The damn thing is so strong that the build up to it shakes the entire planet. And whether or not you're watching the Japanese version, the English version, or, I can say it, the abridged version, the moment he breaks out this attack is full on monumental. No Kamehameha in the series has built up like this. And the payoff? The beam angles off the planet into space! If that's basic, then pumpkin spice me up, motherfucker!
Oh yeah, give it up for Vegeta's monumental moment. Spends an entire episode charging up his attack only to miss, and then he never breaks it out again. At least when Piccolo one and done his technique, he double killed 2 guys who were stronger than him, and I think we can all agree it looked sick as shit. Meanwhile, the only thing that makes the Final Flash special is that it's named. Vegeta's utilitarian nature extends to his techniques. They hit hard, but they're boring.
I'm frankly surprised to hear this coming from you of all people.
Why? Because I play Vegeta? I'm more than just the characters I play, Kieran. What if it was shaped like a dragon? Would that make it your favorite technique?
He has one of those. It's called the Dragon Final Flash, and it's in Heroes.
Heroes is garbage, and so are you.
I will skin you and wear you like a raincoat.
For all intents and purposes, yes, this is in fact an argument the two had about the technique. So in theory, this could have been an example of 2 collab partners in a countdown having a disagreement about the placement in the list. However, those were the key words, a disagreement about the placement in the list. Kieran and Lenny weren't arguing whether or not a placement should have evolved over time, something that Fawn and ChaosKey were arguing about in that particular moment. Sure, it was still a disagreement, which ended up being TP's main point about Chaos and Fawn, but the 2 arguments are ultimately different from one another. Also, even though it was shown in the countdown as an argument, it's not just here as an argument. This whole segment was more so to showcase all of the flaws this technique had, which could have been a factor for why it wasn't in the top 5. And Lenny wasn't just giving out negatives of the attack either, as he not only brought up how the techniques Vegeta performs are directly connected to his utilitarian nature, he himself is more than just a voice for the character, showing that his bias as a VA wasn't going to affect his opinions on the technique. Lastly, before we move on, incredibly petty I'm aware, but this little skirmish was clearly played up in anger. Like, pumpkin spice me up motherfucker, Heroes is garbage and so are you, I will skin you and wear you like a raincoat, come on now.
Now, let's see what happens after the argument of Lenny's and Kieran's, where Kaiser steps in to calm the 2 down.
Whoa, okay, well, I can't. Let's bring it in. Deep breaths, you guys. Let's just remember what we're here for, okay? This is a celebration of the series, not a drunken brawl.
Sorry, you're right. We talked about this, and it's here for a reason.
It's more than just about the look of the technique or its success rate.
The Final Flash is a staple of Vegeta's character, as I said before. It's not only in almost every single game he's in, but it's almost always his most powerful attack. That or a variation of it. And while it's only ever used once in the manga canon, it becomes Vegeta's most commonly used technique in the entire Dragon Ball franchise, and especially in Super, where it's essentially his Kamehameha. Although he still has the Gallant gun, but...
Which, I might add, I think looks a lot cooler than this. But you're right, the Final Flash is Vegeta's most memorable move, partially because that pose is unforgettable. Although it's pretty funny that Toriyama would give him an early rendition of this technique in his fight against Raccoon, known later in the games as the Final Crash.
Vegeta's got a short list of techniques, but when it comes to one with lasting power, the Final Flash rings in at the top, from its pose to its power to its persistence in the fandom.
Also, it looks so much better than the Final Shine attack. Ugh.
Yeah, I'm not gonna die on that hill. I also wouldn't dare roll it in with this technique. Whoever thought that Vegeta should combine his most interesting attack with his most boring attack should be demoted. Maybe flogged.
So, like, the Dragon Final Flash, it's
The Final Flash that shoots a dragon. Exactly that. And it's amazing.
What is it with you and dragons?
Dragons make everything better, Lanny!
We talked about this, and it's here for a reason. If these 2 were legitimately arguing over the placements during the video, why would Lenny and Kieran have talked about the placement of this bit beforehand, and suddenly in the video Lenny argues about the placement of this technique right at the last minute during the recording phase? It's blatant to see they have already gone over their thoughts about the placements before this list was made, and to make it a bit more humorous, they threw in a rant from one of the members of the Tri-Op and disguised it as them going over the flaws of the technique. They don't even keep that charade going after Kaiser breaks them up, as Lenny does actually agree with both Kieran and Kaiser in why it's at this ranking. Hell, He even agrees with Kieran towards the end, which showcases that both Lenny and Kieran were still able to cooperate with one another, something that Fawn and ChaosKey had briefly failed to demonstrate during that particular segment, or a place that TP had thought that showed them not cooperating properly. Speaking of Degree Zero, hey Mister, you want to know a funny clip that would have actually shown a good example of people disagreeing with one another, just in case you were serious about this being a problem? It actually comes up right in one of the degrees you were covering.
Yes, the propeller suit was awesome and all, but I really want something that will actually let me fly. Let's see. Ooh, here we go. The wing cap from Super Mario 64 is the quintessential flying power-up. Once you get it, all you have to do is jump 3 times and boom! You take off into the wild blue sky.
The Red Star, one of the coolest power-ups in Super Mario Galaxy. To activate it, you just shake the Wii Remote and begin to fly around. You can even spin while you're flying and stop in place to aim where you're flying.
If you tilt the control stick or D-pad to where you're flying down and then ascend, you'll ascend much higher and faster. Sure, you can't fly straight anymore, but flying around is still a lot of fun.
Well, with the Red Star, you can fly in any direction, even straight, and the controls are actually silky smooth. You have so much freedom when you're flying.
That means nothing if you can't use it that much in the game. Seriously, it can only be used in 2 areas, and one of them is the main hub. At least the wing cap had levels designed around its mechanics, and it was a great way to get around those levels.
But in the remake, you can only use the wing cap with Mario. In Galaxy, both Mario and Luigi can use the Red Star.
Yeah, well, the Red Star only appeared in 1 game, whereas the wing cap appeared in 2.
Well, your precious wing cap only lasts for so long.
So does yours.
Wait, stop. What are we doing? We shouldn't be arguing about something that's stupid. How about this? Let's just put both power-ups at this spot, okay?
Okay.
There, not only is this a much better example of a source from that time period that shows 2 people arguing in a countdown, as this clip was from this whole degree chain, this argument actually sounds legitimate, as when Fawn and ChaosKey's voices begin to pick up towards the end of their rant over which power-up is better, they actually do not at all sound like they're playing up their anger. If I hadn't seen this part of their video beforehand, I legit would have actually thought they were getting up in arms towards something this mundane, which is something an audience member shouldn't have to worry about. And if this example of mine doesn't end up holding water, as this was already present within the degree chain, there are a plethora of examples you could have used from countdowns at that time that had similar blowups between co-op partners. Why were you planning on choosing an obviously played up argument that happened 4 years ago after your Target's video? I think I went over all of the arguments I wanted to go over, so let's move on to the final thoughts. First off, let me start these final thoughts by saying I could completely be wrong with what you intend to mean by typing, as we all know, that is a bad thing because they disagreed on something and made it evident in the final product. This part, alongside the beginning portion of this text, could have very well been used sarcastically, with you not actually thinking it's a bad thing for collab partners to disagree on something, even if it shows up in the final version. These thoughts did not end up being part of the final video of yours, so it's impossible for me to know what the intended meaning was supposed to be for this part of the video. So if I am completely off base here and these were in fact meant to be sarcastic, I will concede to being wrong, disown this video, and wish you luck on your future endeavors. However, if I could add some advice for future scripts, if you do end up sharing them with anyone, I do think it would be best to indicate which bits of dialogue are supposed to come across as sarcastic, as that sometimes is something a lot of people can't really pick up on quite well. Although, if these thoughts of yours weren't meant to be sarcastic, and you were actually using this TFS clip to say it was bad of Fawn and ChaosKey, and by extension Lenny and Kieran, to have argued during a countdown, I do feel as though some things need to be worked upon before working on scripting projects like these again. Firstly, if you're going to use evidence from other sources outside of the degree chain, make sure you check the date of said video or source to make sure they're within the time frame of the videos you're covering. As someone who has liberally used evidence in videos myself, I too had a hard time with time traveler arguments, as some videos I used had been made way after my target's own video. Seriously, what was I even thinking during that Try 5 retrospective? The reason why it's a bad thing to use these types of arguments is because it's arguing something that your target will have no clue of at the time. They become unfair to make, as you're basically telling your target they should have known about something that might not have existed at the time of their video's release. When you showcase examples that were made during that time frame, your target will actually understand where you were coming from, as they could have overlooked that example during the video's creation. Secondly, when you're about to record for line deliveries, make sure your voice doesn't accidentally give off a tone that might completely change what you're trying to mean. In a vacuum, the points themselves weren't all too bad, as yes, it could be an issue if collaboration partners had legitimately argued on camera, as that shows they're unwilling to actually cooperate with each other. However, if you, say, had used a tone of voice that was similar to that one clip I showed where you were sounding condescending to TP10 those words would have taken on a completely different meaning, as at that point it would have come across as if you're belittling the two for something that you perceive to be obvious. I'm pretty sure your intent in going into this video wasn't to be condescending to your targets, as her description does say, I feel a little bad that all 3 times TP hit ChaosKey were a miss, but hey, mistakes happen. A tone of voice could end up becoming hard to control, so this is just a heads up for the future. And thirdly, when you do use evidence, make sure they actually back up what you're claiming. In mentioning the example of Lanny and Kieran arguing over the Final Flash's placement in the technique list, you indicated that most of the segment was of them just arguing with each other, but when looking into the video itself, it's clear that the argument was only fabricated and that it was used as a springboard to showcase the different flaws of the technique that could have hindered its spot on a higher ranking. And by the end, Lanny and Kieran were able to put aside their differences towards the technique and actually make note of why it's so memorable to people within the fandom. Due to how many lists are out there, how old the countdown community was, and the fact ChaosKey and Fawn showed aggression within their countdown, I'm pretty sure you could have found a source around that time frame that actually showed how not to properly have an argument of that ilk, if your intent with that last bit was to say it was bad to show disagreements in the countdown, of course. Hopefully these bits of critique are enough to aid in your growth as a commentator or as a content creator in general. I'm Jack Loxtile, and I hope to see you all in my next adventure.
In the jungle that is my life, I have always been running from death's knife, glinting and tinged with poison. It picks up speed, begins to fly, headed straight for my eyes.